Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Ramos Law Difference Makers podcast, where I'm the guest actually today, but where Jim and I today have the opportunity to talk to each other, I guess.
Yeah.
And we do cool things.
We're going to chop it up,
Yeah,
right?
we're going to chop it up today. And I understand Jim has some questions for me regarding video, the storytelling aspect of videos, and how even the simplest ad sometimes maybe isn't necessarily just an ad. It's a story in its own self and how the style goes with it. And I believe you had something else there too, Jim.
I also want to talk about a little bit about podcasting because we've been doing this now. We've got some experience under our belts, right? You and I, as we started this process, it was archaic before you got here. And then we really leveled it up with your experience and your skills. And I get so many questions about people saying, hey, I'd like to do a podcast. What's it like? And is it scary? And what tech do you need? And how does it work? And where do you put it? So I just thought between basically talking about digital storytelling and podcasting, be some really good information for people just want to get a message out, whether that's someone that owns a business, someone that's part of a team or a group or a nonprofit or a social service organization. I think it's really good information, and you do such a great job that I couldn't imagine having a better guest than you. And look at you, guest hosting.
Right?
All amazing.
Something like that, yeah. We'll play off each other. First and foremost, I say kind of to answer a little bit, we'll dive deeper into it, but to kind of answer both questions, the most important thing that goes in line with what you're saying is storytelling. And that goes into when people say, what do I do for a podcast? You need to have a clear mission or a good story behind it at the end of the day, you know? And I can't emphasize this too much. Some people get caught up in it a little bit. It can be a bit expensive, but it doesn't have to be the most expensive thing either. You know, because I've had other people ask me too, and I've even helped set up another. I think we had him as a guest here at one point, Cristian Fajardo.
Oh yes,
yeah,
for sure.
Nuclear Rock, yeah. He had started a podcast, and he actually came to me to ask me some questions about how do I get this going. And obviously, it's within a budget. You know, you can get the fancy equipment, you know, and things like that, and obviously it elevates it, but it's just a tool. At the end of the day, it's just a tool.
Yeah, and podcasts are interesting because they do give you a chance to speak out. You can say anything you want. You can get your message out the way you want it. And most people, actually, let me change that. All people are looking to consume content in one of three formats or a combination. One, they want to be educated. Two, they want to be entertained. Or three, they want to be inspired. And so that's how people look to consume information. And so if you're starting a podcast or telling any story, digitally or otherwise, understanding, are you able to educate? Are you entertaining? And are you inspiring? The more you can combine those, the better off you are. But you only have to pick one, right? You don't have to be a world-class speaker and artist. You don't have to have any of that to have a great messaging platform, whether it be through podcast or anything else, as long as you're consistent with who you are. So I think from that perspective, understanding, number one, what you want to talk about or share in your podcast. And is it going to be audio or like ours? Ours go on YouTube and ours go on our audio platforms. You can find them everywhere, like, you know, whatever it is, Spotify and Apple and all the rest of them. I think also the big thing that people need to remember, Gabe, and you can speak to this, the beautiful thing about taking a piece of what I learned from Gary Vee called pillar content, which would be like one big episode of a podcast, is there's oftentimes little nuggets of gold in there that if you understand it, you can take those nuggets out and then tell your story in different ways and different platforms, whether that's transcribing a bit of, if you don't have a lot of editing equipment, you can take out a little piece and blurb and put that into a transcription and put that out on LinkedIn or other stuff, or put it on your website. There's just so many opportunities. Plus you get to meet so many cool people if you're doing this style where we're kind of a conversational format versus a monologue format. What do you think about all of that?
I definitely think so. And the reason why I started with budgets and price, and first of all, because one, we're going to talk about storytelling in general and just how important it is to like the editing process and the creation process of videos. But I also wanted to start with like budget and money, because that is honestly like, I've had a lot of people ask me like, how do I start a podcast? And usually that's what comes, like, they always ask me, what equipment do I need?
Sure.
You know? And at the end of the day, I can't I'm like, well, it depends on your budget. Because I can give you, sky's the limit, honestly, in terms of equipment.
On the high side.
Yeah, on the high side. But you don't necessarily need that to begin with. You need to have a solid foundation of what you're going to talk about. And then that's when I have some people, like, they'll say things like, well, I kind of want to talk about this, or I kind of want to talk about that. And I usually tell them, then I think you need to go back to the drawing board and really hyper focus on what it is specifically that you want to get across in terms of your podcast. Or maybe just be like, hey, this is a casual podcast and I just want to talk about whatever's on our mind, but still you have to have that message, or you have to have that inherently in there to begin with. Otherwise it's going to be disorganized. It's not going to go anywhere necessarily too. And also too, to make people understand that it's not the hardest thing in the world, but it will take time and dedication.
Yes.
You can't just necessarily like, you can definitely do it. Anyone can do it. Everyone has to start somewhere. You don't need to have a film degree like I do to be able to do this. I mean, everything is so like readily available to people nowadays. Right. It's easy. But if you don't necessarily need to know that level of knowledge, but if you don't know, like if you are not willing to put in the time to it, then it's not going to be necessarily successful.
Yeah.
Which for some people it's fine. Maybe some people are really, I don't care if it's just for friends to listen to and it's funny, we can sit down and watch it and chuckle at each other, But if you're serious about like, man, I really have this message and I want to get it to come across and I really want to reach as many people as I can, then you need to have a solid understanding your own self of what that message is, and what the purpose is.
I am so in agreement with you on the purpose and the message. With respect to coming back to the quality of equipment that you have, what if the person is not like we are and wanting it on YouTube? What if they're just wanting it on, let's say that where we started out before you came on board, we were just with Anchor and we would not video them. We just recorded them so that it was all audible and all audio only. And then we would just attach that file to Anchor and we had an app and it was that easy. And so if someone has on the other side, they're clear on their message, it's burning and passionate, and they think, I can't get it out till I have all this equipment. There are other ways too, right? That you can get that out. Why don't you share just a little bit about that side of it?
Yeah, definitely. If you're just doing audio, because sometimes, video is going to be definitely more expensive than audio. I can tell you that much right then and there, specifically if you want somewhat nice video. So definitely audio is definitely an option. You get a recorder, anything that records. And like I said, you can start anywhere. It doesn't necessarily matter what equipment it is, as long as you start. If you really are willing to do it, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Because you can't keep sitting down there and waiting like, well, I want to record the podcast, but I don't have the nicest mic, then it's never necessarily going to get done.
Right.
If you start with low equipment and you started to notice that people are still somewhat responding to that message, then maybe, hopefully, if you are successful, then you can tell yourself, one, I am willing to put more investment into this, or two, maybe if you're really doing good, the content that you're putting out already is making some of that profit already to begin with, that can warrant you spending on it. But definitely audio is easier than doing it with video to begin with, if that's what you feel like. Or some people they're like, I don't want my face up there on the world.
Yeah, they have an aversion to that, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Because again, content can be consumed in so many ways in today's era that passion to get something out there, for whatever reason it might be, is important. I know when we first started, the way we came up with the Difference Makers podcast name is because our tagline or our slogan is, what makes us different makes us better. So makes different difference makers. That's where that all came from. And our goal when we started this show was not to have it be a legal show where we're talking about legal issues all the time. And so for anyone who's watching or listening and has been a part of our audience, a part of our team for a long time, we've talked about everything from pro athletes to people that are musicians, to social causes, for nonprofit groups, for-profit groups and businesses, how to start a business, doctors, and lawyers. So that's just our message. Our theme is put light and shine on the people making a difference in this world who we might not know, right? We always look for celebrity. We always look for this kind of thing to put a recognition to, but there are millions of people doing amazing. That's where the passion for this drives from. So if you have that, then it doesn't matter what step you take as long as it's a forward step, right? Like really start moving forward.
Yeah, you mean at the end of the day, you just gotta go for it. Otherwise, nothing's ever gonna get done. So I guess to kind of bookend the whole thing of equipment, cost, and things like that is, don't let your limitations in equipment and budget stop you from doing it. Anyone can do it.
Yes.
And anyone can start a podcast as long as the foundation is solid and there. Then I know it's going to sound like just, well, no duh, but it is just simple as just go for it.
Yes.
You know?
And you can work your way through it. Again, you can start with an Anchor, one of those platforms where you just tie it to that thing directly from your phone. And so I've seen that happen, and I wasn't an expert at it, but I could get it done.
Yeah.
And so that's really cool. Let's now transition into the broader topic that you had talked about, where we have podcasts, but we also have storytelling through all kinds of means. What if someone wants to be on camera or behind the mic and they just don't feel comfortable because they've never done it before? You know, some people have done it a lot and it seems to come easy. Some it comes natural. For other people, it's hard, but they have this message, this song that they want to get out there. Do you have any tips for people, budding young content or even not so young content creators, maybe people that have been in an industry for decades that have a message to share, but they're just like, oh, I don't know if I'd be good. What do you say to that?
I mean, first and foremost, if you really are so against being on camera, I definitely believe in that idea of like anyone is capable of anything if they really want to. To some extent, though, some people are just gifted with some skills to be a little more social or a bit more comfortable being in front of the camera. Other people are not necessarily. And if that is the case, once again, we already discussed one of the options. You don't have to show yourself. You can simply just, through your voice, you can use animations in your editing to do that. Or if that's too complicated sometimes maybe, then you can simply use like your voice and mix it in with stock footage. Certain websites will let you can look for if you just type in Google search like free stock footage, you can find stock footage that's free to use, because you don't want to use someone else's footage without their permission, because it's copyright basically right there. But there's definitely websites that you can just Google it and just type in free stock footage, and you can put the whatever you want to put in there.
So that would be over your voice. Then they're seeing some sort of image or images while your voice is on the background.
Yeah, and then you're not having to be on camera, you know? Or you can find a friend, someone who you feel like is a bit more able or adept at being in front of the camera, and you can basically tell them what your message is and then have them basically like an actor almost, convey that message. Or maybe since they are your friend, it might not necessarily be a fully acting thing. They also believe in the message you're trying to get across. It's just that they have the skill set to be in front of the camera, whereas maybe you have the better skill set of being behind the camera at the same time. It's just about, at the end of the day, it's a visual art. So you have to be creative with it too.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be stuck with like, oh, I'm terrible in camera. Now, if you want to get better at it, the way I always usually do things is it's like acting almost. It is acting, You're not always you're not your most bubbly self when you're on camera necessarily. You're more calm or you're more relaxed. But when you're on the camera, you have to stop and think to yourself like, okay, like it's almost like it's envisioning, it's acting, it's pretending. You sit there and you tell yourself, okay, I'm on this show and I want to emulate maybe someone like, Walter Cronkite.
Yeah. For those of you who remember Walter Cronkite.
Or Howard Stern, or if, like actors or things like that, just take it as acting and make it playful. Be fun. Like don't be afraid to kind of mess up and just go with it. And if you do mess up, you can integrate that into your edit too. You may be like, hi, how's it going today, guys? My name is, sorry, cut. And you could even include that because then it gives a personality. When people watch that, they're like, oh, he's not a perfectionist. And they might even be like, oh, that's funny. He's trying to like get this in one take, but he's not. And you do that just in the edit and you choose what to include and what not to include. That's the biggest thing with video, definitely, is that sometimes people forget is the editing. The editing is where the magic happens.
Yes. And what's interesting, Gabe, a couple thoughts on that. So you talked about the technical part of getting behind the camera, in front of the camera. from my perspective, where I think I might add some value in this part of the conversation is if someone really wants to do that, it may not be their natural gift, but like anything, the more you practice it, the more adept, to use your word, that you get, right? Mm-hmm. And no one says you have to be an Emmy Award winner mm-hmm. in front of the camera or behind the microphone or whatever it might be. But if you, for me, what I always tell people and what really helps me, I want to be very prepared for mm-hmm. the things that I do. It makes me feel more comfortable. So that's why typically when we do things, I'm talking about stuff that I'm pretty familiar with. I don't do much that, unless it's these kind of interviews where I'm wanting to explore and learn with our guests, then I don't want to know a lot because I want to be a great question asker. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, from the person who's wanting to deliver information or have some sort of a show, I think that when you come from the perspective of you're sharing, and if you're not comfortable in front of a large group, maybe you're more comfortable in this situation, right? With someone that you can ask questions and feel freer in your responses, and you're not having to work so hard. Remember, you and I recently were doing a video shoot for our firm internally, and we have one of our teammates here. And so it was, he was working on something and the thing just wasn't coming out the way that he had thought. So then you guys decided, well, maybe bring someone else to stimulate conversation back and forth. So you guys asked me, we came in, and it was funny when he got out of his head mm-hmm. and he just started sharing instead mm-hmm. of trying to remember all the facts that he wanted to present. When it was just like talking about the topic at hand, it was night and day, right? Mm-hmm. So that would be my advice to people if they're wanting to start something. Be authentic to who you are. If you're not funny, don't try to be a comedian. Doesn't mean that you can't be a little more amusing, or your style of funny may be awesome for some people because it might be really dry and they love that. So don't shy away from anything that you want to be, but just don't be what you're not, right? Yeah. And I think that's my biggest piece of advice for people that are wanting to start something is be who you are. You're just sharing information. It's coming from your heart. You have a purpose, and then just let it go. But you got to be patient. Mm-hmm. These things, I mean, I do not look on one episode how many views, how many likes, how much engagement. I don't do that. I got a team to do that, thank goodness. But I don't want that to affect my message. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so there's a part to all this. And so I think that's really important. But what do you see as, now if we expand that into the storytelling, let's say we take a video, a picture or a video, short video or picture. How important is it to capture the person's imagination or attention, and how do you do that in a short window if they don't want to listen to a 20, 30, 40, or sometimes 3 hour long podcast? If it's just a clip, how do you go about making sure that they stop, look, and listen?
It's a combination of things, definitely. It's a combination of what they say and how they said it. And if, for example, this goes back to like some people are better at speaking on camera than others, or just in general public speaking, that same sort of realm. If they speak very eloquently and very nicely, and if they say something good, then you take that and then it goes from there. However, starting from if someone isn't necessarily speaking the best or they stumble a lot, then it's up to the editing right there to make it seem interesting. And so first it starts with the actual what's being said. Is it interesting? Is it going to grab their attention? And that is very hard to do nowadays because we are just completely flooded with information. So then you really have to like tell yourself, is this going to stand out? If that's your one calling card that you want to get across. 2, then that's where it comes with the visual things, you know? Then you can definitely like edit it a little nicer, or cut in or zoom into people a bit more to make it a bit more dynamic, or put stock footage in, or put in letters or graphics at the bottom to kind of like add a little bit more spice to the video so that it grabs their attention more, so they're not just staring at someone speaking. Specifically, if that person speaking is kind of stumbling their words, they're going to lose attention even quicker.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And also knowing your audience as well too. You're not going to get everyone necessarily, you know, unless you have this wide thing or you're already well established or you just happen to strike gold. You're not going to get everyone. To some degree, it's a gamble. You know, at the end of the day, it is part of a gamble. But if you want to help it, then, like I said, if you have someone who speaks very well, then pick the part where they said something that just really grabs people's attention, you know. if they're talking about a certain subject, let's say they're talking about car accidents in the United States and the correlation between that and drunk driving, you know? If you just pick the clip where you're someone's done saying like, you know, like drunk driving like is caused by this and that, and it's reading correlation, then it's too boring. But when they make a statement like 50% of Americans are going to be involved in a car accident in the next 5 hours. I'm not saying that's true at all. I'm just saying that as an example. Right. But that right there, people are like, what?
I need to learn more.
I need to learn more. And that grabs their attention right away too. And that includes too the visuals, like I said too, of even like when you post a video, for example, on Instagram or YouTube, the thumbnail or the picture that comes up usually when you're scrolling through, that in itself has to grab their attention too. So it has to look aesthetically pleasing, and also to include that phrase right there. Maybe shorten it a bit, so since you can't have that whole sentence that I just said, but just have that fact right there and then it's basically like a teaser trailer. It's like teasing them like, hey, you want to learn more, watch this. And then that's the short clip. And then in doing so, if they enjoy that, hopefully, then that leads them to want to listen to the entire episode as well too.
Yes.
In terms of content as well. So it's definitely a combination of things. Also adding music. It's just about being creative with it, sitting down with it, and every piece of content, every video has to have its purpose. And so not every video is going to necessarily be the same. Mm-hmm. You might be using the same template for one video, but if you go to the next video, maybe the topic goes from car accidents in America and that dire situation to then it goes to, hey, this is how you like implement a workout routine in your life. It's a bit more lighthearted. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to use the same like music that you would use for the other one because the tone shifted.
Right.
You know?
Right. And with all those subtleties that you talked about, everything from what I'll call a headline. Mm-hmm. So if you're scrolling and you see that thing, I can't tell you how many of these headlines I pay attention to every day. Because in my world, like what I do is I always get up in the morning. I get up pretty early, you know, somewhere between 4 and 5. And then I'm in bed and I go through and work on some Spanish stuff that I'm doing. And then I want to do something to learn to make me better every single day. And so I go to YouTube. Mm-hmm. And so YouTube has found enough of my searches, and we can talk about how that all works too, but it found enough of my searches that the things that come up on my feed every single day are stuff about health, wellness, fitness, energy, and also things about activity. So I've been, every day I'll scroll something, and one thing said 150-pound BJJ, which is a Brazilian jiu-jitsu, versus 250-pound college football player. That's what's on there, and then there's just an image of it. I gotta see that, right? What does that even mean? Yeah. And it shows this jiu-jitsu, you know, really tiny guy comparatively, end up tapping out this big guy in one of their shorts or whatever they call them, the very small clip, right, of a couple minutes or whatever that it is. Mm-hmm. But the only reason I stopped was because of that headline. If I'd have just saw the pictures of the two guys stand next to each other, zero interest. So to your point, being able to do those, whether those little captions or headlines or those kinds of things is there. If you don't have that skill, can you hire like, you know, what would they call them? Fiverr or some of these project folks where you just give them projects to do and you don't have to employ them. You hire them for little projects. And it seems like it's pretty good price if you didn't have the budget to have a Gabriel on staff. Is that a way that people could do that while they're learning to do whatever their talents and skill sets live up to?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that kind of goes into the whole thing of video land is not cheap, but they can definitely reach out to places like you said, Fiverr, or they could even reach out to maybe like universities or things like that. Maybe like some college students who are like, hey, I'm interested in this field and I don't necessarily want to get paid. Maybe not that, maybe they want to get paid a little bit or not at all, but they simply want to get their name out there and have the experience that they need. So, you know, to show other people, hey, this is the work I've done. Basically like a, you know, like a portfolio of things. You can definitely get it that way. Or you can definitely obviously do it yourself as well too. And you may not necessarily have the skill sets, but once again, just as you were saying with YouTube, you search your things. there's a whole wealth of knowledge on there. I'm not saying
So
all of
much.
it is like the most correct thing, but you'll definitely get there. I guarantee that, because I'm that type of person. I wasn't taught everything in this craft, and I'm still learning new things every day. And YouTube's my friend there.
Yeah,
when
kind of a
helping me
mentor
out.
in a way.
Yeah. Or if not, who do you have around your network of people you know? You don't know necessarily. And you don't necessarily need a Gabe next to you, but you might have someone who slightly knows a little bit of that, or who's willing to take the time to learn it enough. They might be like, hey, I don't know this, but man, this sounds kind of interesting. I'd have a blast doing this, helping you out with this. And then they get involved in it, and they just get enthralled by it. So then then you don't necessarily have to spend as much, necessarily.
Yeah.
You can work that out whether you pay them or not, but that's up to you right there.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of options. If you want to make it, there are plenty of options without breaking the bank.
Wow, that's cool. That's cool. What inspired you to take this journey along to learn not only the behind the camera and how to make a movie and now which has led to commercials and strategies and all that stuff for, a fairly good sized small business. Is there something that fuels your passion to do that you could share with us that we might latch onto to say, man, I got to be a better storyteller, because you love stories. I know you love movies. You watch tons of movies. You listen to tons of music, another form of storytelling. Tell us a little bit about that and how we might grab onto or latch onto that, even without your skill set technically, that maybe we could go, oh, I need to tell stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a fun thing to do. It's definitely enjoyable. It's an art form. Whatever way you want to slice it, at the end of the day, it is an art form, and it incorporates various things. I think definitely for me, the way I became passionate about it was movies. I grew up watching a lot of movies, and I just loved it so much. It's to the point where it was definitely like an escape to begin with in the beginning, because it's just, you get to go to these different places and you basically get to meet these people, and you get to spend time with them, and their adventures are harrowing or terrifying or this or that, and they make you feel these emotions. I think for me, though, the difference was that maybe for some other people, I think what ended up happening with me is that the stories got even further than that. It really started hitting, I really connected with these characters. I knew they weren't real, sometimes they were for other films or they were based on stuff, but for the most part, they weren't involved in my life. But I just loved it so much because I got to escape. That definitely started as an escapism, and that's why usually, you have cinema that's usually seen in the broader audience is seen as escapist or cinema of the spectacle. And it definitely it hasn't always been that way in cinema history, but it's shifted between but there's always been a spectacle to it, It's always wow, even we take it for granted now, but the first films, just the idea of having something moving, recording it, and then seeing it move was amazing.
Fantastic.
Yeah, yeah, you had literally footage of a train pulling up, and to us nowadays, we're do not even think twice about it. We're it's just footage, we're used to it. Back then, though, people were literally, so the story goes, maybe it wasn't this extreme, but they were terrified. They were oh my God, the train's coming at me from the screen when they went to go see it in the movie theaters,
Wow.
Things like that. Those little things that we take for granted now that the medium has grown up and that we're so accustomed to seeing it everywhere.
Yes.
The medium, not only a film, but just the motion picture or the moving image. So there's definitely, to go back to the question though, the stories just hit me very hard, and I was in it, definitely, to start with. Then as I grew older, though, I started realizing that there was other types of cinema and other types of film, though, that dealt with social issues or that showed other communities that weren't always necessarily represented in traditional films, or that presented a world that was completely different. And we talk about very surreal films or films that even don't necessarily have a traditional story. And being someone that first started with I just love movies, just like with anything that you love, if you start loving it so much, you just want to consume everything related to it.
Yes.
But also you see so much of it that you get accustomed to seeing everything you kind of want something different, you know. You want like
Sure.
almost like if it's a challenge, you know, like an athlete's like, I started doing this to begin with. I started doing my workout like this, but now that I've done this, that doesn't do it for me anymore, you know. I need something more extreme that kind of like satisfies that. And it's the same thing with films with me as well. I started with maybe more traditional action films, you know, like the Jean-Claude Van Dammes, the Stallones, the Schwarzeneggers. I love that stuff, and I was like, wow, as a little kid, I was like, this is amazing. But then I started becoming more aware of the process of filmmaking and also certain things that other directors do differently, or other filmmakers, not just a director. It's a whole team. But they started doing differently that I appreciated because I was so used to seeing it. Like, look how they pan the camera here, or look how they change the color palette from in this scene to a different color palette here. Or they start the story at the end. They start the story by telling it like from the end, kind of teasing the end, and then going back to the beginning, and they don't follow the same chronological order of a structure of beginning, middle, end.
Yes.
And since I was so used to seeing it the other way, I'm like, man, this is awesome.
That's
like,
cool.
I didn't know you could do that. So that's kind of where it goes, definitely. And that's kind of where the passion is, definitely. And to kind of like end this thing of why I'm so passionate about it, I usually like to tell people, for me, like the cinema, going to see the movies is almost like going to church, or if you don't believe in that, or like, you know, like a meditation almost sometimes. Certain types of movies are not just there to entertain me, they're life altering.
Wow.
In the sense that they make me either connect with them and say, wow, this is a character, or this is a situation that I felt before. It might not be exactly the same at all, but the foundation of the feeling and the emotion is there. So I am moved by it, and someone expressed that, and it's cathartic and even sometimes more so transcendental.
Wow, that's so deep, Gabe. And you know, I think if people are along the same line as I am listening to you, if we take that into anything, I think we can apply it either as a consumer or as a creator. Both sides of that work. And, you know, I've heard you say that from both sides of it, touching the body, touching the life, touching the soul, and being able to help someone to touch their spirit through the creative side. If someone is looking at consuming content, I think you gave a whole new parameter to do so. Like, don't waste your time on stuff that doesn't mean something to you, either through education, entertainment, or inspiration, right? That's what we're all looking for. But sometimes I think we can go through sifting through so much that we waste a lot of time finding those. But as we know what we want, then we can search those things. Like, I don't have stuff about silly, trendy dances come up on my stuff because it's not what I'm into. So that I have narrowed my search by continually searching on the things that either educate, inspire, or entertain me. And that's what comes up. And from a creative side, I think it allows us to say, I mean, you're forever telling me, you know, you help me so much by saying, okay, let's look at talking about these kind of topics. And if I don't bring a certain energy to that, then you as my advisor in that way will say, hey, you know, why don't you try bringing just a little bit different take or a little different thing? Let's try that one once more. And so doing that consciously, making a conscious effort in the message, and not that you have to act it all out or do anything in your message, because I think authenticity is the key in sharing your message. Unless you want to be an entertainer and an actor, I know there's a component of that, which you shared earlier, but we should be who we are and share that, right?
No, and use that to your advantage too. Sometimes your own personality, being that quirky sort of person who doesn't always get things perfect or doesn't do things right, can sometimes be in its own self-entertaining, because then people are like, they'll go to someone, maybe for example, they'll go to the Jim Hoven for like the very eloquently spoken person, you know, who like gets things like right all the time. But if they want something different, they have another content creator who maybe does something similar, but their shtick or their thing, their niche that they get is like, they stumble on words a few times, and they show that in the edit. You'll hear that little boop boop sound, and we're like, you know, like it's an outtake, you know.
Yeah.
But they use that sort of weakness or, you know, thing to like to their advantage, because then it gives them personality. You're trying to create your own personality at the end of the day, so use it. And then going back to something you said earlier, though, in regards to we need to consume kind of, it's almost like food to some degree. There's like I think of food when we, especially nowadays, because we consume so much content. I like to think of it as food. Like some of it's kind of like junk food, some of it's more that's going to nourish you. it's the content itself too. Like some content's going to nourish you, and I don't just mean educational, like sitting down and watching something on health or science. I mean something even like that can be entertaining, but that definitely does alter your perspective on life, as opposed to, like you said, maybe like a TikTok dance that is just, okay, that's fun, it's entertaining, it's going to entertain me, but that is what it is. However, you shouldn't not ignore those either too. Is there something like Werner Herzog, the German director, said that you need to be, if specifically for creators, I'll say this much, you need to be aware and you need to take everything in. If you close yourself off to one thing, then how can you be creative? Because you're only stuck in your one thing.
What a great point.
You know, I could watch all these very artsy fartsy films, you know, but if I want to make something funny, then I need to be aware of those things that are also more comedic at the same time too, you know? And it all depends on what message you're trying to go across. You know, like for here, sometimes like, yeah, we're trying to do something more serious, but we're also trying to be funny, so I'll implement some of that. Me personally, for my own personal work, films that I make, I know they're for me and they're more so for just as an expression. I'm not going to necessarily use the same techniques or pull from the same influences that I pull to make these types of videos. But if we close ourselves off, then we're not going to get anywhere either. Or you never know. You can mix the two as well too. Why not take what is considered low art, you know, and mix it with high art.
Class it up.
Yeah, and put it together into this pastiche. And we could go into a whole discussion of postmodern art and how that works, but we're not going to get into that.
Yeah, that's deep.
Yeah.
But what isn't deep, but what is profound is being creative. I was listening to a podcast by a guy named Andrew Huberman, and Andrew Huberman is become one of my favorite go-to podcasts in that he is a scientist. He's a neuroscientist, PhD in neuroscience and optometry. And it might be ophthalmology. It's something with the eyes and then in neuroscience, and he teaches at Stanford. And he puts out a podcast every week about health issues as they relate to science. And so one of the episodes he did was the brain chemistry and the things that go on behind creativity. And he talked about convergent thinking versus divergent thinking, where convergent thinking is where things come together and you can piece them and make links. And divergent thinking is things go away from you, and so now you have big open spaces in between. And as any content creator, any message that you're trying to put out for anything, creativity and what you described as combining, I think becomes crucial, because for the audience to see it as creative, it needs to be something that they may or may not be familiar with, but in a new way. You know what I mean? So, and have some sort of relevance to the situation. Like, for example, some of the stuff we have done has been very creative by saying, we have this Dr. Ramos, who's a medical doctor and an attorney. That in itself is very unique. And then when you take that message, what makes us different, makes us better, it's got so many levels to it. It's very creative because he's, medical doctor, attorney, yes. But the way we operate, the way we do what we do for our clients and within our team is different, and it makes us better. All these different things on a theme that you can do to repackage and move together, that's where the creativity comes from. Now, it might not be the spontaneity of, voila, there it is, but it's this act of looking to take the familiar and making it new, making it special. Do you have any inspirational thoughts on your creative process? Because you're very creative. Do you have any things that you do to stimulate creativity as in your thought process?
I mean, as we've mentioned before, I tend to watch a lot of things, but I've been telling people for the last couple of years a lot, man, like, I was like, man, I consume a lot of media. Books, music, TV, everywhere I go. And like I mentioned earlier, I don't necessarily fully limit myself. It's kind of like a diet. I do like to be more of like on the healthier side, like in terms of like things that I feel like will stimulate my thoughts and will stimulate me a bit more in a more positive ways, as opposed to just like quick junk food, consume it, in and out, I'm done. Because I could sit there and watch like 30,000 videos of TikTok, but if it's just literally just being like the same thing, cats being funny, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
I love watching cat videos.
Yeah. Funny cats are cool cats.
But like at the same time, that's not the same as me sitting down and watching, for example, like a Tarkovsky film or a Lars von Trier film, where I know like these guys are like at the cutting edge of like in terms of cinema, in terms of changing the form completely. and they may not inspire me like to copy them, but at least they inspire me to definitely like think outside of the box. Like, wow, I never thought someone could do that. Then that forces, when I come to do anything I do, I'm like, what can I do to like do this, make this video or create the same message or film whatever I create to make it different, you know? And then I just start pulling from sources too. And that's why I said earlier, don't limit yourself to anything. I do everything. I play video games. There's definitely lots of video games out there that have stories. I watch movies, you know, and I'll watch dumb movies like American Pie, but I'll also watch something like from Michelangelo Antonioni, L'Avventura, like an Italian film from the 60s, you know. I'll read things for literature. I can be funny and read something as dumb as like kids' books, like a Captain Underpants book, but I'll mix that in with Dante's Inferno. I'm not limiting myself necessarily because I want to pull all these things. At the end of the day, they're all interconnected, you know?
Man, that is great advice, Gabe. I think for all of us as we wrap the show up, I think it's important for us to not limit ourselves in anything, in any aspect, in our creativity, in our belief systems, and in what's possible for us and for the potentiality for our communities. All of that stems from this creativity process, from this intaking of information, of having a good filter of understanding what's good for us. Everything that you've laid out is amazing. I want you to take us home by sharing the same question that we ask all the time of so many guests. Is there a piece of advice that you've been given, something that you've learned in this, whether it's through creativity or anything else, that is really part of who you are? It's made the fabric of who you are. And would you share that with us?
I would definitely say something like rules are meant to be broken. And that means basically like, don't stagnate yourself on things. Don't limit yourself. And that goes, I know I keep repeating myself, but don't limit yourself to things on ideas. And specifically in the creative world, since we're talking about the creative thing, do not like think like, oh, I can't do this or I can't do that. No, like you have to be innovative. You have to innovate too. And sometimes too, like what is that saying? Necessity is the mother of creation.
Of invention or creation.
You know, yep. Sometimes it's good to have those parameters to kind of be like, maybe I don't have enough budget for this video, or maybe I don't have this or I don't have that. Then that's when you have to stop and think to yourself, okay, but how do I do it then?
Yeah, what do I have?
Yeah, what do I have and how do I make it work? And in doing so, you're doing it not how everyone else is doing it. So then that makes you stand out more so.
Creative.
Yeah.
Man, that's so good. Break those rules. Gabe, take us out of this podcast. Take us out of this chopping it up.
I
want us to exit on something cool. So you take us out on this.
Take us out on this. Well, if you enjoyed this message, then please follow us on the various social media platforms, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. You can watch Dr. Hovind do a funny dance. I'm just kidding.
It would be funny, all right.
It would be funny. Yeah, definitely. But yes, and if this message has struck a chord with you, and if you feel like there's someone out there who you feel that could benefit from this, then please share it.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And man, it was great chopping it up with you. I know we get to do some of this together, but you're always so busy making our message and helping our authenticity be shown out in the community that this kind of thing where you get to be in front of the camera and you get to share why it's such a beautiful process, man, it's been an inspiration to me. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule.
Yeah, for sure. And for everyone else out there, always remember, keep making a difference.
That's right. Keep making a difference.